begins with a spark and transforms as we carry it from one achievement to another. It grows as we grow. We see it in our eyes every morning. It evolves as we evolve. We see it in the probe that we're sending to Mars. We celebrate it as a nation, as the Arab world, as humankind. We see it now, that it resonates in our very spirit. We are hope. What about you? What does hope signify in your life?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning from the US, good evening from Abu Dhabi, and a very early tomorrow good morning from Tokyo, here in Tokyo. Welcome to Literary Conversations Across Borders. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. And today's topic is something that's very close to my heart. It's all about space. And that's something that we've been working on at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center since 2006. I thought I'd give a very quick introduction to the four main programs that we have at the center. So the first is the Satellite Development Program, which developed DubaiSat-1, DubaiSat-2, and then KhalifaSat. The second is the Emirates Mars mission that we are talking about today. The third is also something that's very close to my heart, which is the UAE astronaut program. This was a program that was launched a couple of years ago and eventually ended up having Hazza al-Mansouri, the first Emirati, and also the first Arab astronaut to get to the ISS, but also the first Arab to go to space for within the last 30 years. So that was a big achievement for the UAE and for the region. Our final program from the four is the Mars 2117 strategy. That's a long-term strategy by the country to eventually have humans on the surface of Mars. The first project or tangible project from that mission is the Mars Science City, which will be focusing on research in water, food, and energy, as well as robotics. These are key challenges for the UAE, but they are also challenges if we want to get to Mars. So that's a quick introduction to what we're doing at the center. I wanted to move on to today's session. We have a wonderful session which will focus again on space exploration, as well as our next mission, Hope. And of course, as we prepare for this launch, it's only 3 days away, so we should be launching on the 15th of July. We wanted to explore what can we expect as a benefit to humankind from this project, but also different types of space exploration projects. And our very distinguished speakers today will assess what space exploration has taught us in the past and where it will take us in the future. So to kick off, my name is Salim Al-Marri. I'm the Assistant Director General and Head of the UAE Astronaut Program at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. And it's an honor and privilege to be here with you today. And please let me introduce our two distinguished panelists. Firstly, I would like to introduce His Excellency Zeki Naseba, Minister of State for the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy. Zeki has been active in government service since 1968 in many key positions, including interpreter and advisor to the presidents of the United Arab Emirates. He is currently a Minister of State in the UAE government, and has also served as Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation at the Foreign Ministry, and Cultural Advisor at the UAE Presidential Court. Our second panelist today is Dr. Farouk Al-Baz, Professor Farouk Al-Baz. Farouk is an Egyptian-American space scientist and geologist, and a member of the Advisory Council of Distinguished Scientists and Technologists to the President of Egypt. He worked with NASA as a leading geologist on the planning of the Apollo program, and played a key role in the Apollo 11 moon landing mission, as well as the other 5 Apollo missions in the late 60s and early 70s. So welcome, Zeki. Welcome, Farouk. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I wanted to start off with Zeki. Obviously, with your vast experience in government, you've witnessed so many changes over the past 50 years in the UAE. What do you believe is the significance of launching the Mars probe on the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the country?
Thank you, Salim. You have talked about the challenges that the Mohammed bin Rashid space program presents to the UAE. And I truly feel with you and with everyone joining us on this webinar that we are privileged to witness a truly historic event. A historic event that will mark the direction for this nation, for this state, but also for the region, for the Arab world, I believe, and internationally for many years to come. And I cannot but help to compare what we are seeing today with what we have seen 50 years ago. You see, 50 years ago, there were also very imposing challenges that stood in the path of the establishment of a new state. And yet there was a man who came with a vision and a dream, who was able to have this vision adopted by his brother rulers. He first Rashid of Dubai and then his brother rulers. And in spite of the vast difficulties and hurdles they faced at the time in the 60s, I remember all the diplomatic and media reports were saying this was an impossible dream. It cannot happen because the Emirates do not have the capacity, the experiences, the expertise. University graduates at the time could be counted on the fingers of our hands. And yet the program went ahead. We saw this UAE develop over the last 50 years. It was truly a historic moment that took the UAE into one direction. And today we are witnessing a similar event, an event that prepares the UAE and the region for the future. It takes us into a new direction. It takes us into a new direction once again, because as Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid said, in launching this program as early as 2006, perhaps, but also with the development of our satellites and now our probe to Mars, is developing a new direction for the UAE and for the region. And I have with me a report which said that this is the first time in history that a stellar probe is being developed, not only to answer the question of physics, and it is going to answer many important questions about physics, but because it's also redirecting the flow of history for this nation. And let me just conclude this by saying, you know, the same three qualities I found, the same three pillars that were able to uphold the vision and dream of the 60s are also present in upholding and promoting the vision for the next century. The first one is that in the UAE, nothing is impossible. We have said that. Sheikh Zayed said that. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid said that. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed said that. And they said that we need to make sure that we work hard in order to make this vision come true. But the second pillar on which this UAE, if you like, vision stands is to say that it's not sufficient for us to see where the future is taking us. In the 60s, if we looked at where the future was taking us, it was leading us into chaos with so much disruption around us. And today, with the COVID-19 pandemic, with everything happening around us in the Middle East, we could say that this future is also clouded by the issues that we have to face. And yet, what Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid said recently at a government summit, it's not enough to predict the future, but we need to mold the future to suit our destiny. And the third and final pillar of this vision, I believe, that I saw in the 60s and I see today, is that this vision, this dream, this ambitious ideas is not only for the UAE and its people. It is from the outset, the UAE started with a humanitarian mission to extend help and aid everywhere around it. And with this space probe that is called the Arab probe to Mars, the UAE is sending a very strong message, and with the different programs that you mentioned that the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center is running, that this mission is for the Arab world, for the Muslim world, and for the world scientific community. So you must excuse me if I say I am truly excited, and I truly believe that all of us are witnesses to a historic major event in this region.
Thank you very much, Zeki. I'm also very excited. I mean, being here in Japan, there's a mix of nervousness as well as excitement. The team has been working for a very long period of time, and whenever you get close to these big moments, you always feel the nerves coming up. But it's fascinating, Zeki, that you mentioned Sheikh Zayed, and both you and Farouk have a strong connection with the late Sheikh Zayed. His vision really set the way forward for us. And I have a question for both of you, but I'd really like to start with Farouk on your 3 times meeting His Highness Sheikh Zayed, the late Sheikh Zayed, Allah Yarhamah. You met him in the 70s with the Apollo astronauts. And can you just tell us a bit of those stories and what you spoke about and the interest of His Highness Sheikh Zayed during those visits?
Thank you very much. First of all, I am very proud of you and all of your colleagues at the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center for all the things that you have already done and the things that we think that you'll continue to do. With Sheikh Zayed, I was delighted and honored to have met with him very early in the game. The first time was in 1974 because I was sent by the American government, actually, to the Gulf region to discuss the scientific results of the Apollo missions to the moon. And I met first with Sheikh Zayed to say hello to him and to tell him what I am going to do. And he became very involved in the discussion about what happened during the Apollo missions and how the astronauts survived and how did they do this and how did they do that. And he was fascinated by it all. And that's why I actually suggested to myself that we should continue to meet with him if we can in the future. And at the end, I told him I have a collection of pictures, and I will show them to the students, and I will give a lecture at the Abu Dhabi High School, Benin. And because there were no colleges then, there were no universities, and so I told him I'm going to give a lecture to the boys, and he looked at me and he said, "And the girls?" I said, "Yes, sir." And as soon as I went out, I asked my helper to make sure that after we go to the school of the boys, we should go to the school of the girls. The second time was in 1975 and 1975, with astronaut James Irwin, that was the command module pilot on the Apollo mission 15, a man who actually walked on the moon. And so he came and he discussed, and His Excellency, the President Zayed, was very keen on learning how do you walk on the moon? How do you actually bend to get samples of the rocks and so on? Things very, very fascinating kinds of questions. And so Jim answered them all, and he was delighted with it. And right after the meeting, actually, in one very interesting notion about Sheikh Zayed for myself, I had taken a photograph taken by the Apollo 15 mission, the same mission of Jim Irwin, and that photograph was taken by the Apollo 15 astronauts. And I took that with me, and there was a photographer, and he showed that picture of the two of us while I'm talking to him about that picture. But the picture itself was fascinating. It looks like this. And Sheikh Zayed said, they say the moon. I said, no, Your Excellency, Your Highness, this is the Earth. He said, what do you mean? I said, the moon is way down here, and that's going around in orbit, and this is the moon down here. But as you look up here, this is the hilal of the Earth. He looked at it, and he said something fascinating, because he said, so it depends on where are you looking from. That was a fascinating kind of thing. And then the third time was with the Apollo-Soyuz mission. The Apollo-Soyuz mission was in 1975, and we came to the UAE in 1976. And I was sent then by the NASA with the 3 of the astronauts of the Apollo-Soyuz mission. There were 3 astronauts, American astronauts. They joined with the Russian cosmonauts, 2 of the Russian cosmonauts and 3 of the Apollo astronauts. And they came and they talked about what they needed and this and that. But NASA had given us a model of the space shuttle that was being designed, actually. And there was a model of the space shuttle. So we actually took it with us, and we sat down with Sheikh Zayed and talked to him about what they did. But then we talked to him about what NASA is going to do in the future, specifically with the space shuttle. And we had the picture, and this is the image of when we were talking to the Sheikh Zayed with this. And very interesting that the first meeting, there were no pictures at all with my meeting with Sheikh Zayed. In the second, 74, 75, there were all kinds of cameras and people came with it. And in 76, with the 3 astronauts, there was the cameras and the television, and there was a television in Abu Dhabi then. So that we actually witnessed the very interesting development of media in the United Arab Emirates.
That's truly historic, Farouk. And you know, the last picture that you showed, the one that was taken in 1976, that picture truly inspires a lot of people today in the UAE. And it also inspired Hazza al-Mansouri, the UAE's first astronaut, because he's a fighter pilot. And in his fighter pilot college, every day that he passes through, and that picture is hanging in the college. So every day he told me that he sees that picture with you and Sheikh Zayed and looking at the model, and he's thinking, would we ever have somebody from the UAE? So if you've noticed, you know, when he came back, he wanted to recreate that photo with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and they have a model of the Soyuz rocket in a similar position. So I think that was a dream. And the first thing he said to me when he landed is that he's achieved Zayed's ambition. So for us, you know, Zayed Tayyibullah Thara had a big ambition towards space. So that was something that he personally was excited about, and I'm very happy that I was part of that as well. So thank you for those historic moments. Zeki, I would like to switch to you slightly, because I think you have a different story to tell, because I've been told that you were with His Highness Sheikh Zayed when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that story, please?
Yes, Salim. I mean, it was a very exciting year again. We were traveling in Spain. I remember that. We had visited Granada and then went to Malaga. And on the television, there was the story about the landing on the moon, the first man landing on the moon. And I remember it because Sheikh Zayed told me, what is the television saying? And I told him, sir, this is in Spanish. You know, I know French and I know English, but Spanish is not yet a language. He told me, no, you should try. Always try and then learn. And that eventually also led me to learn the Spanish language. But anyway, translating what was happening to Sheikh Zayed, and he was surrounded by all his companions and friends and advisors, and they were all of the same more or less age. And they were looking at this scene, and they were telling each other that this is nonsense. You know, there is no way that these photographs are being transmitted to us from the moon. We know that there are 7 heavens, and that going through these 7 heavens is an impossible task. And this must be a kind of made up film. And Sheikh Zayed looked at them and said, no, you know, you mustn't think like this. And let me tell you, all of them, I mean, you must remember Sheikh Zayed was born in the first part of the 20th century in an isolated part of the Arabian Peninsula. There was no access to formal education. The worldview then was, to many people who lived around him, was pre-Galilean. I mean, they just could not conceive that this could happen on the moon. But Sheikh Zayed told them, and he cited the Quran. He said, no, everything happens through God's will. You know, God is the creator of everything in the universe, and man can go through with his will. And of course, he said, if it is God's will, then man can achieve anything. Everything is possible. And I remember that one of the people sitting with him, who was vehemently at first saying that such an event cannot take place, was a Mansouri, was a Sheikh of the Mansouri, Allah yarhamu, Mubarak bin Garran al-Mansouri. He was the one who kept saying, no, it cannot happen, and you know, this is. And then, of course, lo and behold, we see generations later, grandchildren both Ali al-Mansouri, you know, a 16 years old girl who in 2017 won a competition that NASA put out internationally, or something that is beyond me scientifically, how to check the genes, I don't know, and proteins in space. And that was a Mansouri girl who now is working as research assistant at the New York University in Abu Dhabi at 17 or 18. And then, of course, our hero and astronaut, Hazza al-Mansouri, who became our first astronaut to go out to the space station. And let me tell you another anecdote, which came back a little later. I remember in the 90s, we were in Ohio. We were with some, again, companions and advisors to Sheikh Zayed. And there was a cover story in Newsweek that was discussing poverty in the United States. And how the fact that despite its wealth and its economic power and military might, there were so many people who slept on the streets, who were not able to get access to nutrition. And at the same time, there was an article that was discussing you remember in the 1980s, Reagan came up with this idea of Star Wars, of having satellites establish a kind of strategic defense initiative. And an advisor came up, I remember him, Allah yarhamu bardo, Ahmad al-Ubaidli, to tell Sheikh Zayed, look at these Americans, you know, they're still discussing spending billions on space when they should be spending these billions on feeding the poor in their country. And Sheikh Zayed told him, look, Ahmad, of course, they should spend billions on feeding the poor, but don't underestimate the importance of investing in space, because the country that establishes a position in space establishes its future on Earth. So even, you know, at that stage, he was able himself, Allah yarhamu, to realize the importance of directing also your energy, your technology, your ability to explore space, because this brings you in the long term advantages that are innumerable to be counted. And I am really so happy to see that this vision and this dream has been realized today with this amazing pan-Arab, I call it even, interstellar voyage to the moon that fires all of our imaginations and our passions.
Yes, that's fascinating. And I mean, Allah yarhamah, he truly did have a vision. I mean, to look at the benefit of space. That's a conversation that we're even having today. And we always say, you know, we explore space to improve life on Earth. And, you know, somebody from my background could say everything that we do today, even this conversation, wouldn't be possible or easily facilitated without having space assets or space exploration. And I think that really comes right into my next question. And I'd like to ask Farooq this one. I mean, really, Farooq, could you tell us, why are we exploring space? I mean, what are the benefits? Why is the UAE doing this? Why is the Arab world looking at launching Earth observation satellites, launching a probe to Mars? What are the benefits that will come back to us on Earth?
Thank you very much, Salim. Great question. And it is really a multi-component question too. There is one first component is the fact that knowledge in itself is good for human beings, because if we go in knowledge, then we will do better. We will eat better. We will think better. We will develop better. Even human beings, when they walk on the land, if we do not think about the ocean and what it is and what's in it, we'll never see a fish or eat fish. So we need to know that in the water there are things in it and fish, and that fish is edible. And so it's the same way with vegetation, same way with that. And God had created the universe, and the kinds of things in the universe, all of them are there for us to look and see and wonder and ponder. And we cannot look and ponder without trying to understand. So I really think our innate feeling that we must understand our environment, must understand our setting, we must understand the earth and the sun and where we are and so on, is part of the gift from God. That look, human beings, you can think, and therefore you must think about all the kinds of things that surround you, because there is benefit from your knowledge. And there is indeed benefit from our knowledge of anything. And therefore, the more we look into things, the better we will be. The more we learn, the better humans will be, and the better people we will be for the rest of the for the rest of the earth and the rest of the universe.
Yes, I totally agree, and that's something that I believe in. Seeing that I personally love space and been working in this field, but I definitely see the advantages, and the advantages on a global scale, not just on a very small scale for certain countries. I think looking at the Apollo missions, Farouk, looking at those types of missions, those missions inspired a lot of people. When you look at other ways as well that people were inspired, I think of Star Trek, I think of Star Wars, I think of science fiction, and space. I think there's many ways it has been inspiring people. So one thing I'd like to ask you, Zeki, is how do you see space influencing culture and the arts? And have you seen that happening in the UAE? We've been exploring space for the past 20 years. Have you seen something come through to our cultural scene?
Thank you very much, Salim. Let me first add on just one point to what Farouk has been saying about the benefits of space exploration and the benefits of the Mars probe going from the UAE. And in the case of the UAE, very often I hear all of you guys talking about this, and we have, I think, more than 200 engineers and stellar scientists now, and specialists and technicians, and I'm so proud of that, more than 60,000 sharing in a program about space education. But I always hear you say, and including the Minister of Advanced Technologies, Her Excellency Sarah, saying always that this is beyond, it's not just the science, it's actually to change the direction of our country, the history of the country, the economy. We are coming to a post-oil era. We know this. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed said we want to smile as we see the last barrel of oil being shipped out of our lands. What we have here is the attempt truly to create a new, if you like, economic direction. We saw that in the government reshuffle this morning, where a majority of ministries now are focused on advanced technology, on digital knowledge, on a society of knowledge, so that this can also economically be feasible, and it should direct the future of our economy, our country. And we have seen also Minister for Small and Medium-sized Enterprises, and also to establish this society of knowledge, because tomorrow's exports are going to be exactly in the areas of technology and science and small enterprises that serve this sector. But let me tell you about art and culture. Of course, I mean, art and culture is always fired by the imagination. Culture and the arts are what make us as human beings transcendent. It makes us transcend above where we stand in order to create a storyline that feeds our imagination and our passion. We have seen this happen. When you look at some of the cave art that existed 30,000 years ago, even before the beginning of settled agricultural areas, and we had an art that looked at the stars. You look at the pharaohs and what they did with the star and the equinox. You look at Stonehenge, and then you come further and you see how space and has fired the imagination of writers, Jules Verne and the Voyage from the Earth to the Moon, or Anthony Saint-Exupéry and Le Petit Prince. And you look at what is happening in the Emirates now. I was very happy to know that your center, in fact, organized a competition for artists, young artists from various backgrounds, in order to do an artwork, commission an artwork that could explain their passion for the space. And actually, the results of that competition was shown by Hazza al-Mansouri himself in the space station. And you can imagine how this can fire, again, the imagination of young people. I think one young girl actually had a portrait or a picture of a young girl looking to the stars. And Hazza told her, you must go after your dream, you must go after your stars. So yes, this will make an impact. You know that NASA itself in the early 60s started commissioning art for its voyages. And it went on since then, because although even now where you are in Japan, you have cameras that are taking pictures of everything that you do. Somebody once said, cameras can see everything, but they understand nothing. You need artists to be around with you so that they can interpret, so that they can convey the emotional impact that they see through this art. I can see, I have already seen through the competition that you have organized, through the street art that we see now in Dubai. You walk around some of the areas, you can see how this is already firing the imagination of young people. And I hope that you will continue as the Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Space, that you will continue to commission art, to take artists with you. You know, Elon Musk is talking about taking artists to the moon because he wants them to go there also and do things with the moon. We want also to see our young artists, the UAE artists and those who are resident here, do the same thing. And of course, culture does change. I mean, the cultural values, the more you learn, the more you explore, it pushes you in order to have the imagination to go and seek out more knowledge in the outer reaches of space.
Yes, I have been seeing, you know, an impact, as you say, on art, paintings, on public buildings. You know, Zeki, we also, that same competition where we sent art pieces up to the International Space Station, we also had poetry that was sent up, as well as short stories. There was also a short story written that Hazza read in Arabic, and that was played to children down on Earth, and it's available on YouTube. So I think that kind of crossing between culture, arts, and education, and space and science and technology is very important. So hopefully we continue doing that. I think for the next segment, we'd like to keep this session a bit interactive. So we have we'll be running hopefully 3 polls if we have our chance. And we'd like to start with the first poll, if we can have that on the screen. So the first poll will be quite interesting is, do you think extraterrestrial life exists somewhere in the universe? What do you think, Farouk? You've been working in this field for over 50 years. Have you seen any aliens yet?
No, I haven't seen any aliens, but there's absolutely no reason to think that we are alone or we're the only ones that have been created for that. So because the conditions for life, I think, is the possibility of having this somewhere else is a very strong possibility. So I would not be surprised that we will find someday some life forms somewhere else in the universe.
Yes, and we see the results of the poll. So 77% of people do agree. And I think, you know, which is great. Yes. You know, there's been systems that have been discovered recently that have very similar conditions to the situation that we have here on Earth, as well as the distance from the sun. So those systems could potentially harbor some life. So maybe in the next 50 years, we'll see some extraterrestrials. I think the audience agrees. I'd like to shift now to the Hope probe, Mars, focus a little bit about our topic. You know, we are launching this mission in just under 3 days. It'll be about 6 a.m. here in Japan. And I wanted to ask you, Zeki, a non-technical question. So, you know, this is a very large mission. It's a mission that, as we see, even from the press now, everybody in the UAE is talking about. It's a regional and it's a global mission. So, I mean, what do you see a project like this really having a role in the UAE's diplomacy and also our global scientific positioning? Because, as you mentioned, this probe is going to be giving data back to over 200, 300 institutes. And this data is new data that has never been discovered before. So we have never studied the global Martian atmosphere as we will with EMM. So how do you see that affecting the UAE's position in terms of science, but also UAE's diplomacy?
You know, once again, Salim, I truly, truly believe that this is a pivotal moment. that will bring something that is truly new and revolutionary, if you like, to the positioning of the UAE on the global stage. Of course, as you have said, I mean, this probe has already established a record that is truly astounding. Within 6 years of the order that was given to you guys to go ahead and prepare a probe to Mars, you were able to do it. And I know that what the UAE did was something also quite novel. It did not go and try and buy its probe from a ready-made producer. It did that way back when it was doing its first satellite, but by now the UAE, we are doing our own satellites. But at the same time, it did not try to start from scratch because starting from scratch would take it a very long time. So it took the middle path, which is to work with others, collaborate with others. And this is the DNA of the UAE, how to create a collaborative ecosystem in which nations and scientists and people come together in order to work for the benefit, not only of the UAE, but of mankind. And I see this mission, in fact, placing the UAE in the position that it has been always holding for itself, but now in a totally new and unexplored so far, if you like, space, which is interstellar space and space science. The number of degrees that have been introduced in our universities, the number of scientists who have been fired by the passion of your space exploration. But I can also see it do something within the Arab world. You know, one of the government summits that we had recently had as a theme, we need to work towards the re-enlightenment, bringing the enlightenment back to the Arab world. We look around us and we see there are 100 million youth, young people in the Arab world who seem to be without a future, because the societies around us are being torn asunder. There is conflict, there is extremism, and we don't want our youth to do what Farouk had to do when he came back from the States with his degree and couldn't find a job in Egypt, and in the 50s, they had to go to the States and there become the stellar scientist that he is now, with the satellite all to his own name. We want to see our youth, and this is an essential part of the BRSC mission, if you like. It is to bring knowledge and education to the Arab world, and through this knowledge and education and training, whether it's your space program, it's the different initiatives that have been launched, to reading initiative, code programming initiative, education, madrasas, schools. It's really to try and bring knowledge into the Arab world that truly, truly needs it, to bring hope to young people, because the UAE, as you know, we welcome young talent, we welcome scientists, we want them to come and work with us. Now, all of this and many more aspects of this program, in effect, plays directly into what the positioning of the UAE in its science diplomacy, if you like to call it that, will bring to it, because this is science diplomacy. It's working towards, if you like, realizing the goals of the UAE to establish an international ecosystem where countries and nations come and work together. I know for the time being, and especially with COVID-19, there has been some countries raising up walls, trying to move away from each other. This is a project that works in the other direction, that tries to bring people together, and I believe it will be an important part, definitely, of the UAE's science diplomacy and its way into the future in fulfilling its mission that started in the 60s with the Zayed dream, that the UAE should not only be a haven of stability and prosperity for its people and those who live here, but also for those around us, and extend a hand of friendship and cooperation with the world.
Yes, thank you. It's definitely an essential mission for the UAE. And, you know, Zeki, this, you know, for every big mission, you know, this is 2020. There is obviously a very humble beginning. And, you know, for this one, it was in 2005, we sent a team. I was lucky to be one of them to South Korea. And along with me, we had Umran Sharaf, who is the program manager of this mission, Hope Mission. He was one of those young engineers sent to South Korea in 2005. Also, Her Excellency Sarah Lamiri was the first female who worked on Dubai Sat-1 back in those early days. So you can see those seeds were planted 15, 16, 17 years ago, and now the results are coming that we have a mission that is going to Mars. So that's quite, I think, important to note that you have continuity in your decisions and a strong vision going forward. Farouk, may I have a question that is more related to your wonderful experience in geology? So a lot of people see similarities between what we see on Mars and the deserts of Arabia. So as a geologist, what could you tell us about that?
Okay. First of all, I would like to second what Zaki has said about the fact that this inspiration of the youth of the Arab world, men and women, is very important and very significant. I've already seen that in several other countries that have felt the impact of the UAE activities on their psyche, and that's very important. So the youth of the Arab world have now been looking at the United Arab Emirates as a great country, as a symbol for them, and the youth of the UAE can become as an example for them to follow, which is really wonderful. Then, for going back to the similarities between the Earth and Mars, the Earth's deserts and Mars, is something that I actually started because of looking at the Western Desert in Egypt. We saw all kinds of things that looked very much like what we saw in the images that we were getting from Mars. So we started looking into this and publishing and so on. And some colleagues from the UAE saw one of these pictures and actually invited me to Dubai to speak about the similarities between the Earth and Mars or something of that nature. And I came and give the lecture. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid had intended to come and couldn't. So the next trip, I think it was 96 or something like that, he called me in and I went to see him. And he said, tell me about this business of Mars and Earth or Earth's desert. So he said, give it to me in 15 minutes. I said, fine. He was sitting on the slope of a rock, and so we were surrounded with sand, and I began to talk to him about the origin of sand and about the fact that wood forms sand dunes, and about the fact that the dunes in the polar region of Mars are the largest dune field on Earth, bigger than the Rub' al-Khali and bigger than the Great Sand Sea in Egypt. So I started communicating with him about that, and he became fascinated. And to the extent that I actually gave him the next trip, I gave him a model of Martian globe, so you can see some of the features of Mars that are wind created. And as far as I'm concerned, we are also going to benefit from, as far as wind circulation on Mars, about the wind circulation in the upper atmosphere of Mars that the mission Amal is going to give us. So from the scientific point of view, we're expecting that to see the relationship between the wind pattern in the upper atmosphere as to the wind pattern in the lower atmosphere, and therefore the creation of the sand dunes of Mars. So from the scientific point of view, it's a great mission.
That's great to hear. And can you also tell us, obviously there's some link between the beautiful city of Cairo and Mars. Could you elaborate a little bit for our speakers as well? I think this is important.
When NASA began to look at the missions to Mars and when they wanted to name things and so on, and they started giving them ancient Egyptian names and so on, and they said, well, this is a little too specific and so on. And I told them about a pharaoh that actually sent a mission to prove that Africa was a continent surrounded by water from everywhere, way back 2,000 years before Christ. And so anyway, it went on as we looked at it, because I was actually fascinated myself that the fact that Mars had been the reason for calling the main town and the capital of Egypt, Al-Qahira, because it's Mars. Because I knew the story that Jawhar Siqilli, the one that started initiating a new city for Al-Mu'izz Bidinillah, al-Fatimi, was coming from, he came and he sent Jawhar al-Saqili, from a Christian family in Saqaliya in the Mediterranean. He was the head of the army, and he opened Cairo, kind of, and he invaded Cairo and went to, invaded Egypt and went to Cairo, and then he saw the place and he was thinking of creating something new, Al-Azhar, Jami al-Azhar, and then he wanted to create a new town. So he, instead of saying, I'm going to make the town here and they will name it such and such, he said, okay, we're going to create a new town to be the capital. So we need somebody to think of a nice name to name it. So he called his intellectual people, the knowledgeable people, and he put them together and say, select us a name for this city, the new city that will be built next to the Fustat, because Fustat was the capital of Egypt then. They got down in the early evening, and they looked, and the astronomer in the group looked at the sky at that time of the beginning of the meeting, and the planet Mars was rising in the sky, in the dark sky. And planet Mars in the Arabic language is called Al-Qahir, because it's named after Mars, the god of war from Latin. So they said Al-Qahir, the man himself, the scientist himself looked at it and he said, Al-Qahir fi Su'ud, Mars is rising. أنها تكون القاهرة. Let's call it Cairo. Al-Qahira, Al-Qahira. So, and they agreed to it, and it became Al-Qahira, and the French came and called it Cairo, and then the British came and said Cairo, so it became Cairo, and so it is, Al-Qahira is actually named after Al-Qahir, the planet Mars. And therefore, I suggested to the International Astronomical Union that we must have the name Al-Qahira on Mars, and they did that. So there is a valley on Mars called Al-Qahira Vallis in Latin, meaning the Cairo Valley.
That's fascinating. So basically, we're sending a probe to Al-Qahira, inshallah.
Yes.
Which is a little bit closer than we were expecting. But I'd like to go to our second poll question, if we can bring that up for our audience. Maybe we've covered a little bit of this question, but let's see what they say. Space missions cost billions of dollars to run. Do the benefits for humankind that result from these missions represent good value for money?
Sure.
So I would definitely say yes. Zeki, what do you think?
You know, I would like to quote to you what Kennedy said when he sent the first Apollo to the moon, to the landed. And he said at the time, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win. I think this is your answer to why it is so important to mankind that we should go on this probe, and that in the long term it is definitely viable, both economically as well as in terms of humanitarian development and the development of knowledge.
Definitely. Excellent. And 88% people think that as well, over 100 people.
Yep. And they'll just add a simple question about a simple fact that everything around us, the computer that we're looking at, the phone that we're communicating with, all of that came from the activities of the space program from the 60s on.
Yes, definitely. There's a lot of spin-off. NASA publishes a book which is just focused on spin-off technologies. So what technologies come back to Earth that are being used in space. And if you read that book, there are hundreds and hundreds of different types of technologies that we cannot live without today that actually were developed for space. So that's also a fascinating read.
In addition to that, there is actually, during the early years of NASA, we had an office within NASA called the Office of Technology Utilization. And that job for this office was to publish on a weekly basis some ideas to be able to apply in industry. So they asked all of the people that get money from NASA to summarize what they did. And from that summary, they would pick up a few to publish on a regular basis to the general public so that anybody can take that, the result of NASA supported research is published so that anybody within the industry can use it. Way back from the beginning.
That's some foresight. Dr. Al-Baz, maybe I can continue with you. So, I mean, the UAE is developing a lot now. They're focused on space, but that's not just the UAE that's doing that. I mean, we can see the region, the overall Arab world is focusing on space development. That's obviously a good thing. Where do you see this going? I mean, do you see an Arab space agency? Do you see us increasing our budgets, decreasing? What do you see happening? What would you like to see happening in the very near future with the Arab world?
I certainly do hope that there will be a pan-Arab space agency. I suggested way back that we have at least a satellite for the Arab countries to take pictures of the Arab world and help in all the development of it. And nothing happened, but that's okay. It's things that can happen in the future. And we know that we had a Saudi astronaut, and we had a Syrian astronaut, and we have now an Emirati astronaut, and there could be others in the future. And there was some attempt for an Algerian one, actually, but with the Soviet Union. But meaning that, yes, indeed, we have the capability, we have our. The only problem that we have in the Arab world is that we have not looked at our young people and pushed them to the hill. The United Arab Emirates has reached its position of greatness today only because it has supported its young people, men and women, and that's very important. Actually, from the comment that I made at the very beginning from Sheikh Said when he told me, well, if you're going to talk to them, to give a lecture to the women too, not just the boys, meaning from the outset, there was an emphasis on teaching the young men and women. And today we can see the result actually of this being having men and women do as well as any men and women anywhere in the world, as on par with Americans or Europeans or anybody, because the government of the UAE and the people of the UAE emphasize support and education of young people. So depending on the youth can make it possible for us to reach all kinds of levels. And I'm delighted that the UAE has started that and is carrying the banner for that.
Yeah, I think that's a key point you hit on, Farouk, because it's also when you look at a center like Mohammed Barashid Space Center, about 50% of our engineers are young female engineers. I mean, that's something that we are not only proud of, but we would not be able to achieve the objectives that we have been achieving without their contribution. So that's a key factor there, as well as, their average age is 27, 28. So I'm too old for them already. So that shows you that, young people can do quite a lot if you give them the chance. And I think the Emirates Mars mission is really a mission of hope to the Arab youth, that, if you put your mind, if you put your abilities, your hard work, you can achieve big dreams. So I do hope what you hope also happens, that we are able to achieve something on a global Arab scale. And I think that's where we are going towards. Inshallah.
One comment about the age, because during the Apollo missions to the moon, myself and a couple of two astronauts went to get the average age of the people that are running the mission. And that average age was 26. So you guys are 27, you're already beginning to be too old.
We're already too old, yes. Well, that's fascinating. Well, I mean, we've had a wonderful discussion. I think we're coming to an end today. So I would really like to thank two extraordinary people for being with us today. It's wonderful talking to you. And I really thank you both for your time. Thank you, Excellency Zeki. Thanks you, Dr. Al-Baz. Fascinating again speaking to you. It's been my privilege to be here with you. And in the end, I'd like to introduce a very good friend of all of ours, Isabella Bulhol, the CEO and trustee of the Emirates Literature Foundation. She'll join us shortly just to say a few final words. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
It's all I can do to unmute myself. So amongst you venerable speakers, what a wonderful, wonderful talk we have been privileged to listen to. Salim, in the middle of the night in Japan, thank you so much for managing this so fabulously. And Dr. Farouk and Your Excellency Zaki, just such insight. We have fast forwarded 50 years of history to something that when I came in the 1960s to Dubai, before the Emirates was even born, who could have imagined that this is where the Emirates would be today, leading in many ways the Arab world with space exploration, and only a few days away from the Hope probe launching on its journey to Mars. So huge thank you to our wonderful, wonderful speakers. Thank you also to the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy, without whom this series of talks would not have happened. And thank you, the audience, who've allowed us into your homes tonight all over the world. The reason that we have these talks is for you, and we really hope you've enjoyed it. And please, if you can, join us next week, because this week it's really been about the future, but next week we go back into history, looking at myth, legend and history, with a particular focus on the UAE, with His Excellency Abdulaziz Musallam, and also Bettany Hughes, the renowned historian, and Peter Hellier. So you're in for a treat and a complete change of time. We might find bits of Mars, who knows, in the deserts of the UAE. Thank you, everyone, and stay well, stay safe, and look forward to you coming back next Saturday when we've got another session. Take care.